On Beyond Zebra. This one's a little bit obscure. Are you guys familiar with this one? Anybody raise your hand? Okay, good. Good. This one's a little bit obscure, but it's interesting. It's got great art. Our Bible story today, our scripture's in Genesis. So if you could turn in Genesis to 22, beginning with verse 1. Genesis 22, verse 1. A familiar story, perhaps, and we'll see how it connects with On Beyond Zebra. I'm going to read 1 through 8, and then I'm going to skip over, but we'll start on 22:1. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father?" And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So the 2 of them walked on together. We're going to stop it right there. And we're going to go over to verse 15 in the same chapter. Verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies. And by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice." May God bless the reading of his word. So Dr. Seuss's story, On Beyond Zebra, prompts us to imagine a life beyond the boundaries that others place on us, or beyond the boundaries that maybe we place on ourselves. Now, most people confine the English alphabet to 26 letters, A through Z. And Z in this book stands for zebra. But not the person who was teaching Conrad Odell to spell. Conrad Odell is the main character in this book. Listen to this part of the story, and it's really a tongue twister. Said Conrad Cornelius O'Donnell Odell, my very young friend who was learning to spell. The A is for ape, and the B is for bear. The C is for camel, the H is for hare. The M is for mouse, and the R is for rat. I know all the 26 letters like that. Through to Z is for zebra. I know them all well, said Conrad Cornelius O'Donnell Odell. So now I know everything anyone knows from beginning to end, from the start to the close, because Z is as far as the alphabet goes. Then he almost fell flat on his face on the floor when I picked up the chalk and I drew 1 letter more. A letter he never had dreamed of before, and I said, you can stop if you want with the Z, because most people stop with the Z, but not me. In the places I go, there are things that I see that I never could spell if I stopped with a Z. I'm telling you this because you're one of my friend. My alphabet starts where your alphabet ends. That teacher then goes on to introduce little Conrad to a whole new world that he'd never imagined before. He introduces letters like glick and snee and fnad, fnad. and characters such as Sneedles and Nutches and Floober Boober Babber Boober Bubs. And some of the letters look like this. What happens when we go beyond zebra? Either by our own choice or as a result of circumstances we face in life. Going on beyond zebra means discovering new insights and meeting new people and considering new ideas and finding renewed faith and venturing out from our comfort zones or summoning resources that we never knew we had because we had no other choice. Abraham was challenged by God more than once to go on beyond zebra. He was no doubt a bright fellow, but he was also cautious. And he pushed beyond the comfortable boundaries imposed by his cautious, he was pushed beyond the comfortable boundaries, beyond his cautious approach when he was called to leave his homeland and travel hundreds of acres across the desert, hundreds of miles across the desert. Early in the story, God sent him packing across the desert. And he had to abandon much in order to be the father of the nation of Israel, many people. A reasonable person, he was pushed beyond reason, on beyond zebra, when as a toothless old man, he and his aged wife Sarah were told that they were going to have a child to fulfill the promise of the Lord. Sarah laughed, Abraham trusted, and Isaac, who means laughter, was born. He went on beyond zebra, didn't he? Now a family man, Abraham loved his wife dearly, and Isaac was his beloved promised child. Abraham's love for him was immense, but now in this story today, we see him being pushed again, pushed even beyond family bonds. It'd been hard wandering across the desert, leaving everything behind. It'd been hard waiting for that promised child while growing old and gray. It had been hard. But now this child, this beloved Isaac, is required to be a sacrifice, appearing to make God's previous promise null and void. How am I going to be the father of nations if I have to sacrifice my son? Abraham's heart was torn. What could be worse than to hear the voice of God asking you to sacrifice your son? That was the same voice that Abraham had followed across the desert wastelands. The same voice that he had followed and trusted while waiting for the child to be born. Now he had to choose between sacrificing his son upon that mountain or denying the God that has always been so faithful. So Abraham got up, took Isaac and the firewood and the knife, and he set out to do what he had heard God tell him to do. You may have heard that story all your life, and it may not be as shocking to you as it would be to somebody hearing that for the first time. I would say today, people hearing that for the first time would see how in the world this is abuse in the Bible. Isaac knew that something was amiss. He asked, "Dad, where's the lamb for slaughter?" Tears came to Abraham's eyes as he replied, "Surely the Lord will provide." He arranged the firewood. An altar was prepared, and the moment of truth arrived. Binding his own son, Abraham prepared for the very worst. And then suddenly, he heard the voice of the Lord's angel telling him that Isaac was not to be sacrificed after all. See, we know the end of the story, but he didn't. And then he spotted a ram caught in the bush. And God provided. And the voice said that it was good that Abraham was willing to relinquish even his precious one. It was good that Abraham held on and trusted God, even when he was confused and torn. Isaac was the only heir of Abraham, and the only way that God's promise of descendants as numerous as the grains of sand by the sea could be fulfilled. Abraham showed that he was willing to go on beyond zebra. beyond comfort, beyond reason, beyond familiar bounds, trusting that the promise of God would never fail because his God, our God, is faithful. Amen. Amen. Now, there's a story told near the end of the 12th century. There was a young man whose father was a cloth merchant. And the young man loved to ride up and down the road on his fine steed. He loved the horse almost as much as he loved a good party with wine, women, and song. He had a great time night after night, according to the world standards. And if he lived today, we would find him at one of the local community watering holes as he moved from one establishment to the next in pursuit of a few tall ones. Yes, he had a great time. As he rode his horse, he saw beggars on the street, and he would flip the beggar a coin, as was the custom of the day. He did it in part because he cared, but mostly to show that he had what the beggar did not. One day, day after day of doing that, something changed, and he was riding along, and he saw a man who had been completely disfigured by leprosy. Fingers were gone. Face was disfigured. He flipped him a coin in his customary arrogant manner and kept riding by. But something beyond zebra got a hold of him. Suddenly, he stopped, dismounted, and went back to the man, gave him more gold, and embraced him. From that day on, the young man began to look differently at people whom society considered the least. He noticed them. He cared for them. He devoted his life to them. Time and time again, he cared for people in need. Once, he fixed a church building that had fallen into disrepair. And his father said to him, "Son, I don't understand why you're hanging out with these low-class people. I want you to be in the cloth business. Take care of everything for me and handle my fortune. But if you keep this up, I'll have to disinherit you." The young man stripped off all his clothes except for some underclothing and said, "Then I guess I'm no longer your son. I have to follow my Lord." The Lord had gotten a hold of him. Anybody have any idea who this person was?
It's one of the church fathers.
St. Francis of Assisi. He continued his compassionate work, taking up a caring life for the least of God's children, and it's been said that he redeemed the church in a time when it had become little more than a cold institution. Oh my, you never know, that could be today. He brought life and love back to the church in a simple way. He went on beyond zebra. He went on beyond what was expected. Where the care normally stopped, he created some new alphabet letters, and he trusted God. Let me tell you another way that somebody did that. In 1960, there was a man named Millard Fuller. He made his first $1 million. When he was a student at the University of Alabama, he opened up a printing company as a student. Following college, he went to law school. And one day his accountant called him up and said, "I have some news for you. You're a millionaire." "What's next?" Millard replied. "On to 10 million, on to 100 million. That's what's next." For Millard, however, things were not right at home. Some of the values that he had held when he was younger, when he and his wife Linda were first married, made a covenant to the Lord, to love each other and to love God, but they had gotten displaced along the way. And she left him. She went to New York, and she called him back at home, and she said that she needed some time, but that he could come see her, and if he wanted to, in about a week's time, they could see if there was anything left to salvage in their relationship. So they went to see a Broadway play. They got together. He went to New York. They went to see a Broadway play called It's Never Too Late. They came out and were going to take a taxi ride through Central Park, and when they opened the cab door, the driver said, "Congratulations, this is your lucky day. You're the first ones to ride in my new taxi cab." They took the play and the sign as a step that there might be a chance for a new life, and they took long walks and they spent time in a cathedral walking and talked about what had gone wrong in their life and why things weren't the way they wanted them to be. And finally, they came to the conclusion that they had to return to Christian faith that had been so important to them in earlier years. So they chose to go on beyond Zebra, exploring new territory beyond their comfort zone. After a few phone calls, Millard Fuller had his accountant begin to give away his wealth. He gave it to charitable institutions. He and Linda moved to a Christian community at Americus, Georgia, called Koinonia. And from there, they became involved in fixing up homes for people living in poverty in that area. So Fuller took his skill and his brilliance and his insight and his fortune, and they created Habitat for Humanity. And over the decades, 5 decades now, they have over hundreds of thousands of houses have been built or refurbished for people around the world. And Millard Fuller calls it simple Jesus economics. People working together to provide a decent home for all God's people. They went on beyond Zebra, on beyond what's normal and reasonable. That's the call of Christ. What does he say? If somebody asks you for your coat, give them your shirt too. And then he also says, don't just forgive once or twice, forgive 70 times 70. Which is a way of saying on and on and on. And most of the people who go on beyond Zebra don't get recognition and fame. They're just doing it every day. Showing up at the soup kitchen or loving people by visiting them at the hospital or, being a Christian can be inconveniencing. It can get in the way of putting ourselves first. In Jerusalem, a band of close friends finished a meal at which emotions run high. Their leader, our Savior Jesus, had shared food and drink and spoken of his body and his blood, and he'd wrapped a towel around his waist and he'd washed their feet. And although they were very close, someone spoke about betrayal. And they looked at each other and they said, Lord, is it I? Is it I? A few of them, those especially close to him, went out with him to a garden to pray. And Jesus continued to pray and struggle even after they fell asleep. He was a long way from Nazareth, a long way from Galilee, and a long way from those walks on the beach and the joyful times they'd spent healing and teaching and feeding. The events of what would happen were all too clear to him. And he said, Father, I don't want to do this, but nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And he prayed and he struggled and he prayed such that the distress formed drops of sweat in the form of blood upon his brow. But he went forward on beyond Zebra, trusting in God. He went to the cross of death and the empty tomb and later to resurrection. And we have the same opportunity to press on, following the path of faith in spite of what we can see or neatly reason out. Because what God asks us to do to go on beyond Zebra doesn't make sense. Several years ago, a group of students got together to discuss the question of what is the minimal requirements to be a Christian? What do you have to believe? Do you have to be baptized? What do you have to do? And the discussion, as Ken, dragged on for a long time, and at one point this woman rose and began to leave, and the convener said, excuse me, where are you going? Don't you like our discussion? And she said, no, not really. I'm not interested in what is the least requirement to be a Christian. I came here trying to find out what the most is I can do for Jesus. That's the call. Not a question of what we need to do to get by, what we need to do to get our fire insurance so we don't go to hell, but rather what can we do? What can we do? This is the faith of Abraham, the faith of Francis of Assisi, the faith of Millard Fuller, the faith of you fill in the blank. Who is it that you know that goes on beyond zebra? Beyond comfort, beyond family, beyond wealth, beyond age, beyond disability, even beyond death. May this faith inspire each of us to stretch beyond our limits, to care for those in the flock, to reach out to others, to reach out beyond the status quo, to ask tough questions about what would it look like for Garden Baptist to go on beyond zebra. It might look like something completely new and creating a whole new letter in the alphabet. You see, most people stop at Z, but not us. Let's read the last page. Because finally, he said, this is really great stuff, and I guess the old alphabet isn't enough. I don't know about you, but the old alphabet isn't enough these days. We're kind of like we were in St. Francis of Assisi's day, that to really get people's attention about Jesus, we've got to go on beyond zebra.